Today, we're going to be delving into the science, the physics of how rifle, projectiles, bullets, and ammunition works, and all the technology and things that go into that. So, by God's grace, if that intrigues you, this will be a good episode for you. Did one a while back on handgun ammunition and how it works. Today we're going to be talking about rifles. Before we get into the introduction and bio, reminder, there will be a raffle for new patrons that join this month, March in the year of our Lord 2023, a Mora knife, black and tan, and some other stuff. You can check out a picture of that and some other stuff that's available to everybody on Patreon. Most stuff is for just patrons, obviously. If you don't know about Patreon, it's a cool way for you to support the podcast, and hopefully you see a lot more value than what you give in there. I just gave out my actual best bug out locations, coordinates of several different bug out locations to the patrons. I recently did an area study of the U.S., which I did an episode on, but I went into zooming in different areas on the map and stuff like that on Patreon. Also, some other things that I do. Been a professional shooting instructor for a long time. Military, law enforcement, civilian. And I can generally look at people, by God's grace, and correct their shooting and make them a better shooter. I can do the same thing on video by looking at videos, looking at pictures of the target, and generally diagnose what's going on there. And that's a service that I have given in the past to patrons. Also, virtual hunting. I've been a professional big game hunter and guide. Been blessed to hunt all over this beautiful country. And I can look at a map or something, someplace you might plan on hunting. You give me a little bit of details, and I can kind of virtually be a virtual assistant in helping you with that hunt. Just a few things available that I've done on Patreon. Anyway, if that at all intrigues you, consider going to Patreon. There should be a link in the show notes. With that, I'm going to put in the intro and the bio. Hello, gunfighters, and welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting and gun-related stuff the right way with God at the center. So I think I'm going to forego the lengthy bio. Try to abbreviate it. First and foremost, I am a Christian. That is number one in my life, serving God, following Jesus. Combat veteran, served in the United States Marine Corps and the Army. Also, law enforcement veteran, private contractor, state rifle and pistol champion. Professional big game hunter and guide. If you feel called to support, check out Patreon. There should be a link in the show notes. With that, I am your host, Michael Milito, and I am blessed to serve you today. Rifle projectiles. For all the time we spend, I think, in the gun community analyzing and overanalyzing this new model of gun versus that model of gun. You know, is Daniel Defens really that much better than Smith & Wesson M&P? Or is this optic, this 1-4, is that 1-6? Do I really need that? Is this optic better? Is this quality better? Do I need this option? For all the things we spend on and time we spend on the rifle and the optic and all that stuff, kind of the point of those things is to connect with a target, right? But the one thing that does the damage on the target is the projectile, is the bullet. And I think a lot of times we underanalyze that when we spend so much time on other things, because that's what's going to do the desired effect, whatever that is. Whether that's a varmint bullet that we want to dump a massive amount of high velocity energy very quickly in a shallow target, or whether it's to change somebody's behavior in a defensive encounter, or to punch through barriers, whatever you want that bullet to do. I think we should spend a little bit more time analyzing that. We're going to delve into that today. And I was kind of in a quandary as to where to start on this. I don't want to go all the way back into the, muzzle loader, blunderbuss days with round balls and pouring the black powder down the muzzle. I love that. I love black powder shooting and hunting. But I think for the sake of what most people are into today, for today's discussion, we're going to talk about modern Spitzer, that is pointed, bottlenecked rifle cartridges. They've been around for over 130 years, and there's a reason they're the de facto standard. That's what we're going to talk about today, and I may get into some specific cartridges, but this is going to be an overarching generality of how rifle ammunition, and especially the projectiles, the bullets, work. Note that proper vernacular. I'm not one of those, like the soup Nazi of gun nomenclature. If you call it a clip, it's a magazine, but whatever. If you call them bullets and they're really cartridges, whatever. But for proper vernacular, so we understand each other, the bullet is the part of the cartridge that flies out the end of the barrel. Cartridge is the entire package, like a 308 cartridge or a 30-06 cartridge. 30-06 is a cartridge. It is not a caliber. Caliber would be 30 caliber. Both 308 and 30-06, 300 Win Mag, they're all 30 calibers. 0.30 of an inch. It's just the decimal point measurement of an inch. A 50 caliber, 0.50 is half an inch. Ballistics coefficient is the ability to fly through the air. To put it in very simple terms. Sectional density in general is an object's ability to penetrate thicker media, whatever that might be, from windshield glass to muscle tissue. There's other factors that go into that, but just to lay out some terms, because I probably will spit them out through the course of this. People just spit this out that are gun people and you're around them and you want to better understand, but you don't want to ask because you don't want to appear ignorant, then hopefully this will help you understand that. I don't want to act like I'm, mansplaining to you. Nobody popped out of his mother's womb, myself included, to know all these different vernacular and terms and gun terminology. We all learned them along the way, so hopefully I can help you learn. Maybe you're out there listening, you know way more than I do. But just so we understand each other in the beginning. And if there's some other terms I haven't laid out, hopefully I'll explain those. So, a long time ago, projectiles were mostly just lead. When we started driving them to higher velocities, we would start shedding that lead in the bore, which is bad. So we put a metal jacket, usually copper or brass, but a full metal jacket around the projectile. And that's what we call today a full metal jacket. It's simply a lead core with a copper jacket of varying thicknesses. It's designed to be very aerodynamic. You'll hear that as a Spitzer bullet, a pointed bullet. Most modern bullets are. There are exceptions. But just obviously a more streamlined bullet flies through the air better. And that's what you refer to as a full metal jacket. And you'll also hear it referred to as cup and core. A lead core and a copper cup drawn around a lead core. Cup and core bullets. Very, let's say, rudimentary tech in its most basic form. It's a lead bullet with a copper jacket around it. These are pretty much the military standard, have been for a long time. We have some more advanced stuff now. Because of the Hague Convention, not the Geneva Convention, it was kind of decided on that that would be the de facto standard. They're not the most effective bullets on, let's say, living targets, but they're easy to produce, mass-produce, manufacture, and they work well for that purpose. They're streamlined, they give greater range. They're pretty simple technology, and as such, they can be made quite accurate. Even today, you'll see a lot of the most accurate bullets for like match competitions as a cup and core bullet. Your Burgers, your extreme long range type bullets, they're cup and core bullets. That it's proven technology. We've been doing it for a long time. Getting consistency is pretty easy. So, full metal jackets, they are what they are. And somewhere along the way, somebody decided they wanted better terminal performance. Terminal performance meaning, or terminal ballistics meaning what that bullet does on the intended target. And there's whole sciences into that, ballistics, and there's internal, external, and terminal ballistics. We're talking about terminal ballistics now, what it does to the target. And somebody realized if we leave an exposed tip on that round, it will expand better. And this is what's referred to as a soft-pointed bullet. These are still very common, and these are still probably the most common go-to hunting round and very common for defensive law enforcement rounds, a soft-point bullet. You take that cup and core bullet, but instead of drawing the jacket all the way to the top, you leave an exposed piece of lead. I should explain something. In most modern high-velocity rifle cartridges, you don't see classic hollow points like you do in pistols. You're dealing with a whole different ball game. It's a whole different arena. Your average handgun, let's say a fast 9mm load, 1200 feet a second. Just your basic, old school, 308, been around since the 50s, or the 30-06 been around for over 100 years. You're talking 2,800 feet per second with a much heavier projectile. You're talking a whole different world. In general, you won't see big hollow cavities. You might see things called a hollow point, like a burger, where it's got a very, very tiny hollow point in it, but you're dealing with much greater velocity, so you don't need a big gaping hollow point to make it expand. Or do you generally want a hollow point in a rifle bullet? So going back to the soft pointed bullets, it's simply a cup and core bullet, and there's other varying degrees of this. But for your most basic, without any other tech into it, it is simply a metal jacketed bullet, but it's not a full metal jacket. The jacket stops towards the end of it. You may have a very small portion of exposed lead. You may have a larger portion depending on velocity, and a lot of science goes into this and engineering. But that's basically what it is. When that soft lead nose hits, like a full metal jacket that in general will go zipping through, that bullet starts to expand, dumping more of its energy into the intended target and doing more disruption of whatever matter media that is. Muscle, bone, organs. These are classic. They're, again, probably the most common go-to hunting round. They're affordable. They're easy to manufacture. You're just taking that proven technology and you're just leaving an exposed piece of lead at the top. They're great for a lot of things. Now, this is not exactly a linear progression, but I'm going to try and make it linear so it's easier to understand. Sometimes, especially with magazine-fed guns, when you shove a soft lead nose bullet up on a feeding ramp or something like that, you can deform the top of the bullet, which I shouldn't have to explain. That's bad for consistency and accuracy. Also, you might want something a little bit pointier, because the pointier something is, the better it will fly through the air. In general, there's a lot that goes into that. But all other things being equal, the more streamlined you can make that bullet. So there are other tips you can put on the bullet. Aluminum was used a long time ago, and pretty commonly today, you'll hear the term ballistic tip. Now, ballistic tip, I believe, is owned by Nosler. And a lot of people will just say ballistic tip, but Nosler ballistic tips. But there's a lot of other rubber, plastic, elastomer, whatever the actual chemical makeup of the tip is. It's some kind of synthetic tip on the end of that bullet to make it pointy and streamlined and fly through the air. And also not deform when it gets slammed into the feeding and into the chamber of the rifle. So it does a couple of things there. And in general, what happens, or what's supposed to happen, and there's always this gray area in ballistics where things don't always work out the way they should. You could shoot an animal or whatever target it is precisely where you want to shoot it, and that bullet is plenty big enough and it's good construction, it just doesn't perform the way that it should for whatever reason. So, but in general, the ballistic tip or the polymer tip or whatever tip it is designed to shear off and leave an exposed area on that bullet in which to deform that bullet, and again increase the diameter of that bullet and increase the amount of damage it does in tissue. So very simple again, a cup and core bullet, a lead core, a copper jacket, and then instead of an exposed lead on top, they put some kind of plastic, polymer, synthetic material on there to kind of act like the exposed nose that just generally comes off or goes away when it hits a target. Doesn't really weigh much, doesn't contribute much to the overall weight of the bullet in general, because those materials weigh far less than lead does. Now remember, I said with a rifle you're dealing with far greater velocities. Maybe 3 times the speed of sound or more. I mean, some high velocity rifle cartridges, not even new ones that have been around a long time, go over 4,000 feet a second. Again, compare that to a 9mm 1200 or your 45, which is under 1,000 most of the time. You're dealing with far greater velocities. Such great velocities that with your classic cup and core bullets, whether they're soft points or ballistic tips, you can actually get separation of the core and the jacket. They'll just shear away from each other because there's such great force, such high velocity, such a massive amount of energy. Now, you might want this to happen a lot. If, again, talking about specific things like varmint bullets. You've got all that energy over 4,000 feet a second in, let's say, a 40 grain 22-250 bullet. And you don't have to really know what that is if you're mostly into the tactical guns. It's a classic varmint hunting cartridge and a very good round for shooting something like prairie dogs. A prairie dog is what? 1 to 3 inches thick, depending on what part of the body you shoot them in. All that energy, if I want that to dump, I want massive fragmentation. So not an issue there. The really thin jacket, old school cup and core with a polymer tip on it would do great. However, if I'm stepping up in game size, deer, elk, bear, I've even been blessed to guide for bison. Big targets like that, you don't want that to happen, right? You want penetration. And for that, you kind of want that bullet to hold its integrity. Well, there's a couple of ways that ballistics engineers and companies do this. They bond the bullet together. They will bond the jacket to the core to hopefully keep it all together. And the more mass it holds, the more energy it retains in one piece, the deeper in general it will penetrate. And again, there's always a gray area in ballistics. You could have a great penetrating bullet, a great caliber, and it could just hit the shoulder some kind of weird angle on some kind of bone and just turn it a weird way. But in general, that's the way you want it to work on the bigger animals. So you want a bonded bullet. And there's 2 main ways that these companies will bond a bullet. They'll do a chemical bond or they'll do a mechanical bond. One of your classic one of these that's been around for decades, it's still great. In fact, it was the first load that I thought of when I'm doing my Alaska rifle project. In fact, I bought the load before I bought the rifle. It's a Remington core lock. As the name suggests, they are locked together. Now, I just looked it up because I don't really care as long as it works, whether it's mechanical or chemical bond, but they say mechanical bond. I just looked it up on the core lock website. So they mechanically bond. And those core locks have been known for a long time. The old green and white core lock box. You can probably still buy at Walmart. Your 308, your 30-06, they're locked together. And it's proven technology. That round has been around a long time. It's probably not exactly the same as it was when I was a boy looking at the boxes. Surely they've gotten some better things in there. They even have the core lock tips now, combining that technology. But without going too far off track, they bond those together so that you maintain that integrity of that bullet. For the most part, you might get some fragments or something, but in general, a lot less than you would in an old school unbonded cup and core type bullet. Now, in talking about this bonding, I must step back, and there is a bullet that did this before bonding that did a really good job. And if any bullet has a lot of street cred in the hunting world for big game performance, it's probably the Nosler partition. And as the name might imply, there's a partition. Unlike just your common cup and core bullet, basically you have a copper jacket, looks like the letter A or the letter H, kind of depending on what caliber and bullet design it is, but you can kind of picture that, where the copper jacket itself has a middle line in that separates 2 big compartments of lead, one in the front and one in the back. And how that was designed and how it actually works and has worked for decades, when it hits the object, hopefully the animal, that front part of that does deform and dispel a bunch of energy, but the back part remains intact and keeps that integrity and drives deep, so you get a good balance of penetration and expansion. And these Nosler partitions are kind of legendary for that. They're a great, great bullet. So that's another way of doing this. So we have bonded. Now you have tipped bonded bullets, just combining things we already talked about. You should be able to deduce kind of what that means. Now there's a whole other class of bullets, and you'll hear them referred to as solid copper, monolithic, monometal, whatever you want to call them. They're talking about, instead of the traditional lead cup and core bullets, it's kind of all one homogeneous material. It may have a tip on it or something, but the bullet itself, the part that does the damage, in general, is going to be a copper material, copper alloy mixed with different things, gilding metal or whatever it is. And these sometimes can have no lead in them at all. In fact, a lot of times that's the point because of legislation. And a lot of people might write those off and think, I don't live in a place where I have to use lead-free ammo. And I'm happy for you. That's great. But sometimes these are a really good choice whether or not you have to. Sometimes I think they are literally the best choice. Example, by God's grace, I hope to be, God willing, traveling to Alaska and living there. Kind of my go-to Alaska rifle. I haven't announced yet. By God's grace, I will soon, but I settled on the 30-06. And I picked 2 go-to loads initially to test out, and hopefully the rifle, by God's grace, will like one of those. One is a 220 grain Corlock classic load, good reputation, good street cred for big and dangerous game. The other one I chose 180 grain Barnes TSX. This is kind of your classic. There's a TSX and a TTSX, which stands for tipped. As you might imagine, it has some kind of synthetic tip on it, better aerodynamics or whatever. But these mono-metal, solid copper, whatever you want to call them, bullets, especially the TSXs, they also have a really good reputation. And in general, not in general, in point of fact, if it's the same bullet profile, the same length, these bullets are going to be lighter for caliber than a traditional lead bullet, obviously, because lead weighs more than copper. Anyway, rifle twist rate, people think you need a faster twist rate to stabilize heavier bullets. That's a generality. The length of the bullet is what needs to be stabilized. In general, these copper bullets are long, so make sure, do your due diligence, make sure these loads will work. Most of the companies will do their due diligence and offer loadings that will stabilize in most rifles. Otherwise, it would make a lot of financial sense for them. But just realize you're dealing with a different ball game. So if you're looking at like a ballistic coefficient or weight for caliber, as far as weight for caliber goes, these bullets in general punch far above their weight class. They intend to, because they don't have different components, they're homogeneous, they tend to have a lot of integrity and stick together, unless they were specifically designed to like shed petals and bust apart. They have a really good reputation for holding their integrity and driving really deep, even if they're light compared to a, let's say, traditional cup and core bullet, because that might lose its integrity. And although it starts off heavier, if it shears into, I'm just throwing an example out, 6 pieces, those 6 pieces individually don't have as much mass and they don't penetrate as deep, whereas a mono-metal bullet in general, if it's designed to, will, even going through bone and stuff, usually retain its integrity and drive really deep. So you may decide, even if legislation doesn't dictate, that you want one of these bullets. Let's say you're shooting a fairly marginal caliber, you want low recoil, you want those advantages. Let's say you're shooting a 270, great cartridge for elk. But I would submit that these new mono-metal bullets, they may be a better choice than the more traditional bullets, especially the unbonded cup and core bullets. These mono-metal bullets can do quite well. Now, I've referred a lot to hunting, but it goes into the defensive world as well, and we're going to hopefully steer this into the defensive, because hopefully that's something you like about Gunfighter Life. We talk about both. Now, going into what we talked about, the Hague Convention and why a lot of militaries use full metal jackets. For a long time, I think the philosophy, or I've heard this philosophy, I've never met anybody that worked for the Defense Department that actually did this, but it's kind of understood that you want to wound an opponent, especially in more traditional wars that we fought with fairly similar cultural values, Germans, Russians, where if you wound a soldier, they're taken off the battlefield and you need people to take care of them. That's a win. So a wounding bullet was okay. You didn't necessarily want to kill everybody as fast as you could. That wasn't what you wanted bullets to do anyway. It might be more advantageous for you to wound an opponent so that they can't fight and then they need 1 or 2 people to take care of them. If you look at that from a war-winning perspective, that's great. Until you get into like the radical Islamic jihadists that want to kill you at all costs, whether they're wounded or not. Then you might decide, maybe that's not the correct philosophy. But traditionally, full metal jackets, a lot of times I think because they're cheap and easy to produce. That doesn't mean for you as a defense-minded individual. Now, let me state this. I am a gunfighter. I hope that you are a gunfighter. I am not an executioner. My goal, if I have to project force via a firearm, because that's what a firearm does, it lets me project force to change somebody's behavior. I should be doing that because their behavior is so egregious that it threatens the life of myself or my neighbor. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. I want to change their behavior post haste, right? I am not an executioner. I want them to change their behavior really quick. That's my goal. Whether they die or not is inconsequential to me. If they're trying to kill somebody or committing a mass shooting, and I can stop them from doing that and they don't die, whatever. My goal is to stop them from doing that bad thing that caused me to shoot them in the first place. And understanding these ballistics and terminal ballistics may help you do that. For the same reason, I would not encourage you to have full metal jacket as your go-to defensive ammo in your 9mm. I would not encourage you to have your nice Daniel Defense or Smith & Wesson M&P or whatever it is totally kitted out with the latest and greatest optic and the coolest sling and the Gucci Cerakote or whatever it is, and have it loaded with full metal jacket, right? That philosophy is different. You're probably not fighting a massive Red Army on the plains of Siberia. You want to stop that person's behavior as quick as possible, and to do that, you probably want that ammo to dump its energy in the intended target. It also has the added benefit of, for every amount that the projectile expands, it should reduce its ability to penetrate. You're dealing in a crowded group of people, which a lot of people today live in cities. That's a real thing. It also has the added bonus of not only changing behavior faster in general, and this is a generality, if you shoot somebody right in that T-box of the face with a full metal jacket, it'll do fine at changing behavior. But in general, these other bullet types will do it better, and they'll give you less that massive penetration. Look at a traditional 8mm Mauser. That can go through a lot of people. A 308 full metal jacket, that can go through a lot. You may decide you want that. Maybe it's your go-to truck gun and you think vehicle ramming or shooting out of your vehicle into another vehicle is what you want. But make an informed decision. In general, you can use a lot of this technology to your benefit. Again, the traditional cup and core. And I hope that you appreciate that I don't have sponsors on this show. This show is a gift from God, supported by viewers like you. If you like the unbiased opinion, hopefully you'll consider stepping up and supporting that. Should be a Patreon link in the show notes. But anyway, if I mention like a brand or a bullet type, it's because I'm using it as an honest example. Because some company gave me a bunch of free stuff or is paying me to tell you how great it is and that you should go out and buy it. I consider that a bribe, and you shall take no bribe. For a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of the righteous, says the Lord God Almighty. But maybe you decide you want to run your 308, go to peanut butter and chocolate hitting the fan rifle with Federal high shocks. They're a great round. They're affordable for a good expanding round. They're what we talked about as a soft pointed bullet, exposed lead tip. They do very well. They have a lot of proven track record. You may decide that's the way you want to go. You may decide you want to run Remington core locks. A far better choice, in my opinion, in a lot of things than a full metal jacket. You may decide your go-to peanut butter and chocolate hitting the fan rifle is an AR-15. For a lot of Americans, it would be. Can you shoot deer with a 5.56? Yes, you can. I did a whole episode on hunting with the AR. You may want to go check out, but you can do it. It's not a good choice. It's not a great choice. It's not even a good choice. It's a possibility. If you're going to do that, you may really want to step up to some of this better tech. You may really want to consider like a 55 grain TSX, a Barnes monometal bullet for that. And they kind of punch above their weight class as far as weight and caliber go. And they drive deep. You may decide you want to go more traditional, but you want a good bonded bullet in 223. One of my go-to loads in years past has been the 55 grain Federal True Tactical Rifle Urban. It's a great round. Using some of this technology in the defensive rifle world. Defensive carbine, fighting rifle, whatever you want to label it. Great round. I used it in law enforcement. I've used it for a long time. Also Spear Gold Dot. They leverage this technology for defensive rifle rounds. And a far better choice, I think, for the go-to well-regulated, well-armed citizen to protect himself and those around him. In general, don't just assume this. Don't just think because, the military uses green tip, that I'm going to use green tip. Green tip, for the most part, is garbage ammo for this type of purpose. I would use it if that's what I had. Also, there is a niche application. I was a commander of a tactical team. We work with rifles. If I thought vehicle ramming was a threat, and it often was a threat, it might behoove you to have, as I've espoused in the past, one magazine loaded with green tip for penetration. That's why the military has it, for really good penetration. But it's, in my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinion, like 3 MOA ammo. Not great ammo. It was designed for a purpose that usually doesn't apply to us. Now, if it's my go-to truck gun or something, maybe I want a magazine of that. But I don't want it as my go-to fighting ammo. I really don't. There's, I think, way better choices for both survival and hunting and defense for the most part. Talking about bullet tech, if you don't know the green tip, it's usually colloquially just referred to as green tip because it has a green tip. Penetration round, the M855. And it's kind of a more traditional cup and core bullet, except that it has enclosed inside that copper jacket an internal tip that's covered by the copper jacket. That internal tip is tungsten. It aids in penetration. So if you're fighting out of a vehicle or shooting at a moving vehicle or somebody's taking cover behind a vehicle, you may want some of this ammo as an option. But again, in general, I don't think it's a very good choice or even a decent choice for a defensive or fighting rifle. I think there's far better choices. What you may want to do for a defensive fighting rifle is adopt an approach. Feel free to take this from me, and I'm sure I didn't come up with this, but I'll try and find, like I do with my fighting handgun, a practice load and a go-to defensive load that shoot the same point of aim, point of impact. There are even companies that do this specifically, like the Speer Lawman 147. They have the Lawman, which is their full metal jacket, same bullet profile, and their Speer Gold Dot 147, designed to match each other ballistically. You may decide you want to go with, and in general, for the 223, I'll throw out as an example, you may find some good 55 grain full metal jacket. You may find a 55 grain load that, for you, out of your rifle when fired by you, shoots the same point of impact. You have to test this. For me, I like the Federal True 55 grain. That doesn't mean it's going to shoot the same out of your rifle. But if you can find a matched pair, a good training 55 grain full metal jacket load, and a good defensive load, whether that's Speer Gold Dot or Federal True or Hornady Tap or whatever it is, that shoots the same point of aim, point of impact, and train with the one and have it loaded up and ready to go with the other, again, testing it, knowing that it works and shoots the same and cycles in your weapon, you may decide you want to go that route. You may decide, like I do with my Scar 17 currently, that the Federal High Shock is so affordable and it's got good bullet tech and it works well and shoots crazy accurate in my rifle that I pretty much can shoot it for everything. I'm not saving a bunch of money by going to full metal jacket. And it's such an accurate gun, I think a little bit nicer, good ammo in there is worth it. But you decide that for yourself as a gunfighter. Don't leave it to somebody else. But I think whether you're getting into gunfighting or guns intrigue you, or you just are entering the world of ballistics, and hopefully this helped make a lot of sense to you. You've been a professional police officer, soldier, most of your adult life. You've just been given what you were issued. Hopefully it still helps you as well. If you get the liberty to choose for yourself what you're going to trust to protect your life and the life of your neighbor, give it some real thought. Again, a lot of us analyze and I think overanalyze this rifle versus that rifle. Well, is the 16-inch barrel really that much worse than an 18-inch barrel? And is the 1-6 by SIG really better than the 1-4 by so-and-so? Optics and rifles and twist rates and finishes, to just a mind-boggling level of minutia. And I've been there. Perhaps take a little bit more time and analyze a bullet. Not just how tiny of a group it shoots on paper at 50 yards, 100 yards, but what does it do to the target? What's its terminal performance? How does it work? Is that design characteristic and design parameters even what you want to do with it? There's a reason the military uses green tip. Mostly because NATO decided a long time ago they were going to, and people adhere to the NATO thing. But does that even apply to you? Are you in NATO? Do you want to do the same things that they're trying to do? And I'm all about the wisdom of our fathers. Maybe your grandfather hunted with Remington Corlocks. Maybe that's still a really good choice for you. Maybe it's not. Maybe there are better choices now for your caliber, for your situation, for how you hunt. Again, take a little bit of time, I think, and spend it on What do you want that bullet to do? What characteristics do you want it to have? Because there's a lot of really good options today. Anyway, with that, I think I'll start wrapping up this rifle bullet tech episode. There's a lot of stuff I probably left out. This is an overarching generality, but I hope that it was helpful. Again, if you appreciate the content, I consider this like paying it forward. You can get the content for free, but I hope you'll see the value in it and decide to contribute to the show via Patreon. Again, there is a giveaway. Hope to be, by God's grace, raffling off a Mora knife and some other stuff to one of the new patrons this month. Again, check out Patreon. There should be a link in the show notes. And a sincere thank you to all the patrons that support. I am humbled and blessed I get to serve you, and I appreciate that. With that, the tactical tip of the day and then a tactical verse of the day. I make no apologies that I'm into survival and preparedness. I don't try to dress it up and label it something else. You call me a survivalist. I like to survive. I like to, while I'm here as a pilgrim and a stranger on the earth, breathe air, drink water, eat food. That's a great blessing, and I like to continue to do so, whatever crazy times might come. A lot of polymer stocks on rifles are hollow. You can turn those into a survival stock. A classic one, my Ruger 1022. It's a takedown. Now, the stock itself doesn't have a way to do this, but if you cut the back of it, as I did, you can actually pop the back off. On the standard polymer 1022 stock that I have, they may have changed the design, and pop it right back on. I have a little piece of 550 cord that I put on there as a handle so I can rip it off the back. You can put all kinds of cool stuff in the back of the stock, and you can do this with many other gun models. I'm looking at one of my hunting rifles. I'm blessed to have a Kimber Hunter in 308. I unscrewed the rubber butt pad that came on it and put on a slip-on recoil pad that I can just pull right off. You can put things such as extra ammo, a bore snake or bore cleaner, maybe some patches with oil on them in a little bag, a compass. You can do a lot of this to a lot of these new polymer stocked rifles. I have the Havalon knives or the outdoor edge knives that come with these replaceable, for lack of a better term, like scalpel type blades. You can put one back there in case for whatever reason you lost your knife, you forgot your knife, and you shoot an animal. Now you have a knife in which to butcher that animal. Also, I probably should save it for another episode, but lest I forget, a tactical tip inside a tactical tip. If you shot an animal with a bottleneck centerfire common rifle cartridge, humans went through this whole period called the Bronze Age. The Copper Age, the Bronze Age. Well, if you shot an animal, you have a brass case. You can hammer that flat with a rock and sharpen it on a rock. Is it the world's best knife? No. But you can use it to butcher an animal. And that's going to bring us to the tactical verse of the day. You lust and do not have. You murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and war, yet you do not have because you do not ask. If you're wanting something, have you gone to God and asked Him for it? Have you sought God's advice whether or not you should even have it? Have you asked God for it? And another verse that reminds me of, he who comes to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. I believe that. I hope that you believe it as well. With that, men, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.